My name is Sherry Siegel. I am the coordinator here at the Mabel K Senior Center. I like to joke that I am its best employee. One might say I'm its only employee. There are a lot of familiar faces here today, but also a lot of new faces, so I wanted to say welcome. Doug is obviously a very big draw, and we thank him for fueling the fire for this program and getting everyone out of their houses. In a few minutes, I'll turn this over to Roger Jacobs, who will talk more about today's program and how it came to be. But because there's new faces, I did want to talk a little bit about Mabel K and the kinds of things that we offer here. For those that don't know, the Mabel K Senior Center was started when Mabel K, a Haddonfield resident who lives on Lake Street, donated her house in her will to the borough, wishing it to be a haven for Haddonfield seniors. Her house was used for a few years, but was too small. So in 1994, the borough sold Kay's house and bought this building, dedicating it to Kay. I like to call it Haddonfield's hidden gem, and we are grateful for the borough for its dedication to its seniors. We have a full slate of programs Monday through Friday. I put a calendar on everyone's chair and a description of all of our events that we have. We've got at least one fitness class a day. You may or may not hear the 10:15 class upstairs. They have a good time. We have yoga, line dancing, tai chi, silver sneakers classes. We have a lunch and speaker program every other Wednesday. We got a lineup of good speakers. Sometimes it's senior related, sometimes it's general interest. We have a group called Coffee and Schmooze, where people just come and drink coffee and talk and meet people. It's a really easy way to get out of your house. Bingo, mahjong, book club, bridge, lots of stuff. One program I want to highlight, and then I'll turn it over to Roger. We started this project 2 years ago with ninth graders from the Haddonfield Memorial High School come to the senior center. They're assigned to a senior, and they interview the senior, write up their story, and hand it back in a hard copy little memoir with pictures. We have a photographer who comes and takes professional photos, and we hand it back for posterity. Sometimes people like to give it to their kids or grandkids as a keepsake. That is slated for fall 2023, so I will let everybody know when that starts. It's got a lot of traction. Haddonfield School District loves it. We've been on the news. It's very exciting over here. I do have a weekly newsletter that goes out every Sunday. I try not to overdo my emails. Nobody likes overflowing emails where you press delete, 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 delete. So I try not to overdo it. Try to keep it relevant. And on that note, I think that's it. I'd like to turn this over to Roger Jacobs, recent president of the 65 Plus Club and an all-around Haddonfield do-gooder. So here you go.
Well, I'm not sure I deserve that introduction. But good morning, folks, and welcome. I think this microphone is on. I am Roger Jacobs. Less than 2 weeks ago, my one-year term as president of the Haddonfield 65 Club for retired men ended. We had 63 meetings in those 52 weeks. We also had numerous trips, 2 parties, a total of 14 other activities that we participated in, including the flea market, the fall festival. So I've got a little more time now to devote to this project, and quite frankly, looking forward to it. And working with Doug Rauschenberger, Sherry Siegel, Len Tomlinson, and of course the infamous David Hunter sitting in the back, who is organizing most of this. A little bit of history, folks. Back on June 8 last year, Carl Sunoco gas station in Haddonfield on Haddon Avenue, owned by George Deeser, celebrated its 65th anniversary. As part of that celebration, George made substantial donations to the Haddonfield celebrations, the Haddonfield Foundation, and the Haddonfield 65 Club. To mark that occasion, 65 Club member Doug Rauschenberger gave an impressive presentation at our clubhouse on the history of Haddonfield's gas stations and automobile dealerships. The program was extremely popular. In fact, it was standing room only. Afterwards, many of our members stayed behind to speak to Doug, and a lot of them missed out on the free ice cream from Mr. Softy at George's Sunoco station. Thank you again, George. he did a great job. Since the level of interest in this subject was so high, we asked Doug to do it again. But this time it has an added dimension. We're recording today's presentations for posterity. We're making a video that will be spliced together with Doug's presentation, and we'll give that to the Historical Society Archives Center. We'll also post it on YouTube, so folks who are not here today will be able to watch it at their leisure. But that's not all. Next Tuesday, January 31 at 9 a.m. right here at Mabel K, we will host a show and tell session based on memories of the Haddonfield gas stations and automobile dealerships. The presenter will be Ken Tomlinson, whose father, Warren L. Tomlinson, owned and operated Warren Service Station, a mobile gas station on the corner of Haddon and Euclid, where the TD Bank is now. All are welcome, and I believe there'll be more M&Ms available for everybody who participates. The week after that, on Tuesday, August 7, we'll have another show and tell with another presenter, followed by another presentation on Valentine's Day, February the 14th. Those sessions will be recorded also. So our goal is to preserve the memories that these speakers have and that you have regarding this aspect of Haddonfield history. It's important for us to do this while we can. Let me give you a sad example of why. We are in the process of making arrangements to conduct a recorded interview with Carl Nieukirk, the founding proprietor of Carl's Haddonfield Service. We received the news that Carl had been hospitalized with a severe infection. Now, sadly, he's gone. He died just a week or so ago. And also gone is the opportunity to record his personal memories. Very sad. So while we want everyone to enjoy this as a social event, we also want to emphasize that the main goal is to record your memories for posterity. So please feel free to make comments and ask questions at the end of Doug's presentation. And come back to Mabel K each Tuesday at 9 a.m. from now till we either run out of things to say or we run out of gas. So with that, please welcome Doug Rauschenberger. Doug is a co-historian for the Borough of Haddonfield, writer extraordinary, a former director of the Haddonfield Public Library, and a past president of the Historical Society of Haddonfield, and the co-author of this fabulous book that gives you everything you need to know about Haddonfield. So, Doug?
I think everyone can hear me, and so glad to be here with many people I know, a few new people as well, and happy to do this. It was mentioned last year, David Hunter came to me and said, Carl Sunoco, we've moved quite a long way along here. All right, get me set up. Let's go from the beginning, not the end. There we go. Carl's is 65 years old this year. How'd you like to do a history of this? And I said, well, of course I would. I love doing anything with Haddonfield history. I'm not a Haddonfield native, but I've been involved in Haddonfield history since I came here, and I was a history major in college, so I'm so happy to have come to a town. It's good I know something about history, because what I know about automobiles is you put a key in and you turn it and it goes, which also dates me that I still have a car with a key. So I certainly know nothing about automobiles, but I do know that it's been an interesting part of Haddonfield's history. So I love doing these comprehensive histories, and when I did this presentation, there hadn't been quite as much publicity, and I did it for the 65 Club, and of course I said, how many gas stations do you think there were in 1957? Well, it's been kind of bantied about in the papers and whatnot, so I won't ask you to guess, but it was 15. Carl's is the last remaining one, but not that many years ago, we had 15 in town, and we will go through that, and obviously we're looking for memories that people have of that. This is a picture of Carl's soon after it opened. If you notice, it only has 2 bays. This is a picture from somewhere in the 80s. mid-80s. Now you notice we've expanded from 2 to 3 bays in this picture. And of course, for those of memory long enough, there was the famous 1995 fire. Well remembered, I'm sure, by many of you. The fire amazingly did not destroy the gas tanks. It started in the where they work on the cars inside, and apparently the pumping started soon after the fire. And here is a picture a few weeks after the fire. What jumped out at me when I found this in the Historical Society archives was the person at the gas tanks is none other than George Dazer, the current owner of Carl's. He was working as an attendant there at the time, and so he's come full circle around. I'm going to talk briefly about the dawn of the automobile in Haddonfield and previous to that. Of course, before the automobile, the horse is what predominated. Here is a picture of what was, I'm calling, transportation central in Haddonfield in the late days of the horse. This is behind Gibbs Tavern on the highway, and you can see the Clement Street houses in the back of the picture. This is where they had livery stables and a lot of horse stables, and so it was sort of transportation central. Now you know what's there. A parking lot for automobiles. Kind of fits. And right by the livery stable, the intersection of Haddon Avenue, Mechanic, and Clement Streets was the last blacksmith shop in town. Closed in the mid-1920s. And guess what replaced it? A gas station. And I love this. This is from 1913. Ad in the Haddon Gazette, and it sort of shows the changing times. The Fisher's was the blacksmith. It was he was succeeded Tools blacksmith shop that you saw in that picture. But I thought, you've got ads for horse business, you've got cars, and Mr. Fisher was the blacksmith. But if you note also on the very bottom, he says carriage and auto painting. So times were a-changing. We don't know who drove the first automobile in Haddonfield, but in 1926, there was an article in the local newspapers, and they decided that a Mr. Bell of Chews Landing Road, who owned a coal dealership in Haddonfield, and his beautiful house stands right at the corner of Chews Landing Road on the east side as you come into town. Apparently he wins the credit for being the first car owner. However, this was very nice to tell us it was Mr. Bell who did it, but it doesn't say what year it was. So I assume that when the first auto came in town, it probably would have been noted in the newspaper. Sadly, we don't have a lot of surviving newspapers from that 1900 into the 1910s era. We have scatterings of them, but not too many. So that will remain a mystery unless we can find something through the Bell family, perhaps. If you note, one of the things they say on here is that it wasn't necessarily received well. Guided by a lever, it was one of the town's curiosities for a long time. Numerous complaints were registered against it, residents claiming that their horses and mules were scared to death whenever the contraption passed in a grinding of machinery and a cloud of dust. And I think Haddonfield undoubtedly had some of the very earliest automobiles. The town had a lot of very well-to-do, wealthy business people, and who could certainly afford the newfangled horseless carriages. And there's a picture of a couple of other ones. This is the Gill family in Haddonfield taking an early ride. That the poor lady in the back there does not look too happy. The roads in Haddonfield in the early days of the automobile were dusty and muddy. How would you like to drive on a rainy, muddy day with an early automobile? This is the intersection of Potter Street and Ellis, and in the early 1900s. It wasn't until sometime in the 1910s, about 1913, Kings Highway gets paved with macadam, the first street in town. Up to that point, all dirt. Soon there were numerous businesses relating to the car in Haddonfield, and many of the early car businesses were rather specialized. There was one that did nothing but service and recharge batteries. Another only dealt with tires. Both batteries and tires were not long-lasting in those days. Batteries were not self-charging, and tires did not hold up well on roads such as we just saw, largely unpaved and rather difficult. Most of the businesses, including the earliest gas stations, were located, perhaps not surprisingly, in the central business district, right downtown. The Haddonfield Garage, shown here, operated by Mr. Watson, was smack downtown, basically where DiBartolo's Bakery is, next to Passarella's. And in the days before zoning laws, however, there was no prohibition from them appearing in residential areas. I don't think they lasted too long, but there were at least two repair shops like that, one in the 400 block of Washington Avenue and one at 40 Potter Street. I can't imagine they were too popular with their neighbors. There were gas stations as early as 1910, and the first few were located right on the sidewalk. These were the pumps were right on the sidewalk. You just pulled up. You didn't pull off the street. What amazes me, though, is that this picture here on your right. This is Fisher's gas station and bicycle shop. The picture is from 1962. Can you believe it? As late as 62, pumps still on the sidewalks. Soon, the sidewalk pumps started to give way to places where you could pull your car off of the road. And they began to spring up in earnest in the 1920s. And the borough naturally started to begin to establish regulations about gas stations, where they could be, minimum distances from residential properties, and other restrictions. This picture is the corner of Haddon Avenue and Kings Highway. Actually, there were a gas station on 3 of the 4 corners there, the Happy Hippo corner being the only one that remained gas station free. Some sites were proposed but never happened. One rejected gas station site was the corner of Potter Street and Kings Highway, across from the Kingsway Apartments. Too dangerous an intersection, the borough said. A very good call. And speaking of Grove Street, in 1909, Grove Street residents complained about speeding traffic and recommended that the speed limit be 8 miles per hour. As a nearly 45-year resident of Grove Street, I can tell you I don't think 8 miles per hour has been the standard for a very long time. But complaints about speeding traffic continue, something that I think is universal and forever. And then there were the car dealerships. There were many in Haddonfield over the years. It's amazing. I do not know many of these names, but they were here in town. I mean, all Ford. Buick was on Tanner Street. Pontiac, I'll show you that later. Chevrolet, Oldsmobile, Nash. Chrysler had 2 different locations in town. Maxwell, Chalmers, Page, Jewett, Plymouth, DeSoto, Packard, Hudson, Apperson, and I think we may discover a few more once we get deeper into the newspapers and things like that. It wasn't a problem at first for a dealership to be in the main business district. Cars typically had to be ordered and were not on hand for purchase. Perhaps there would be one on display, perhaps not. Sometimes it would just be a book. One of the people at the 65 Club told me a very interesting story, one I had never heard, but a lot of the early dealerships had small models of the cars that they put in, and that was what you saw rather than a full car when you did it. And apparently these are great collector's items, as I could imagine, but I thought that was very interesting. I had never heard of that. That all soon changed. Larger dealerships with cars on the ready came to Haddonfield. The first one probably about 1928, 1930. By 1957, there were only 4 dealerships left in town. I'll get to them in a minute. So Carl Sunoco opened the doors in 1957. I would call that sort of the heyday of the automobile here in town. And as I said, there were 15 and scattered along Haddon Avenue, the Grove Street bunch, a couple on West Haddonfield, and some closer into the business district. And I'll kind of go through them one at a time in just a second. And we'll go, some of these you will remember. This was the Andrus Texaco service station, 701 Haddon Avenue, where the Rite Aid parking lot is today. Save on gas. I remember this one, so I'm starting dating myself that I do remember some of these extra ones. This was directly across from Carl's Sunoco, where the breadboard is today. There's something that's familiar to people. I think I don't have to tell you where that is. I figured since this is a historical presentation, everything's in black and white except the contemporary one. I thought we'll give Carl a nod and give him a color picture. And this is Warren's. That was Roger mentioned earlier, then the Tomlinson family. This is where TD Bank is today. And directly across the street where Lenny, Vermont, and Leonard real estate office is at Tanner Street and Euclid Avenue. This was a long-time Atlantic Richfield service station. And I do remember that as well. One of the things we're going to try and determine is when they went out of business, when things changed or whatever, part of our ongoing research on the project. This is my probably favorite picture here. This is Strong's Gulf. I was going to say, we have someone in the audience is related to Mr. Grandfather Strong. This is what stood where the Tools blacksmith shop was that I showed you earlier. A very quaint little tucked in there. And there's currently an office building there at the intersection of Mechanic, Clement, and Haddon Avenue. As I said, the site of our last blacksmith shop. So I'm not sure how long that lasted. Do you know when it went out of business? Just roughly.
It'd have to be in the 60s.
60s. Okay, that would have been my guess. Yeah.
He fell and he tripped over the pump or whatever and broke the hip.
That was it. Oh, interesting. Okay. Good. Well, I just love that little gas station. It's just. Now we're kind of moving up Haddon Avenue. We're on the other side of Kings Highway now, and I just ran across this picture for a while. I had not ever seen a picture of this. I had sort of assumed this was directly across from the post office, where that office building is right next to where that empty store is, the old pickle barrel, for those who, again, dating myself, of those who remember that, next to that. I had kind of assumed it was going to be one of those pumps on the street sort of business, given how tight it is, but by goodness, it is there was just enough room apparently to pull off another Texaco station in town. This is what was Bank of America across the street from the Acme, on the corner of Walnut Street there. Then we go to my street, Grove Street, which had a nice number of ones. The Birdwood Esso, and you can still recognize that building today, pretty unchanged. That's the Goodwill Donation Center. right next to it, it's now a medical office building. That was, let me see, the name of that. Birdwood Esso was the last one. This was then Bill's service station. And right next to that was Shepherd's Gulf. And this is now the new, the Ripa Medical Center there at the corner of Lake Street. Amazing, right along the row, all these gas stations. Up the street a little, still a automobile related business, the Grove Auto Service. They're not on our, we don't count them because they don't pump gas and haven't been for a long time. So they're a service station, but not a gas pumper. Although they did pump gas off and on for years, but they've been off for quite a long time. But that is still there, as is. And of course, the picture I showed you earlier of the pumps in 1960. Still in downtown, middle of Haddonfield. This is right next to Grace Church, would be right here.
Check out those high prices.
Oh yes, you can look at all the prices, and I know I saw one of the pictures that I looked at earlier. That's another. We'll have to find the lowest price we can find. I did see one that said 19 cents. Yes, time going by for sure. So. We've concentrated on year of 57 because of the Carl celebrations. We do know that there were earlier gas stations that came and went before that, and I'll talk about that in just a minute. Once we got west of the railroad, the speed line, you had, what was this one? This was an Esso station. That's where Haddonfield Culinary is today, and the next one right by it was an Atlantic station. Then that's where that empty bank is on the corner of Linden today. A lot. Yes?
I just want to say I worked my way through college in that station. I worked there for 5 years.
Wow. What was the price of gas then?
I don't remember.
Less than now, right? We kind of concentrated mostly on gas stations, but we did have, as you saw, many dealerships in town. Most of them very small and very early, but there were in 1957 again. I thought we'll see what else was going on automobile-wise in Haddonfield. So it was all concentrated kind of up on Haddon Avenue. This was Ingram Motor Sales. It had been a car dealership for a long time, originally a Pontiac dealership as late as 1928. And as you see on the sign, they sold Oldsmobile and Borgwarn. Never heard of them. A German company. I don't know how long they lasted or whatever, but they were being sold in Haddonfield in 1957. This is where those stores are, kind of right across from China King, on the other side of Haddonfield Commons, where the veterinarian Dr. Nearborn and others are in there. It was kind of, Fawcett's was in there for a while as the kind of a towing service and whatnot, semi-automobile related, but if you want to count that. Probably the biggest one, though, however, was just across the street where the Haddonfield Commons are today. And that was actually, according to this, it was Winner's Ford at one time. We know it today as Winner Ford, but it was a fairly large operation from this aerial picture that we saw. They were fairly late. I'm not sure exactly when they came to Haddonfield. I think sometime in the 40s, and exited probably around 1970 or so. But it was a very large operation. Yes.
After I worked in the gas station, I worked in that building, and I was there with Ken McDonald when we moved over. They moved to Cherry Hill.
Okay.
And
Great.
it was it was a great move, and we had a lot of fun. Anyway.
And a lot more room in Cherry Hill than.
Yes. Oh, at one time it was one of the largest port agencies in the
Yeah.
United States.
Yeah.
On Grace Road.
Yeah. So they certainly didn't move far out of Haddonfield, though. They wanted to keep the Haddonfield trade, I think. So. Then we had Haddonfield Chevrolet. This was also an early one. We know it was in operation by 1930, maybe a little earlier. Went through a number of name changes, left in the early 70s, and this was basically where the Rite Aid is today. And the last one, going back up the road here, is McAllen Buick, and this was at 807 Haddon, where that large office building is on the other side of Marne Avenue. I don't know when, again, we'll work on finding out when exactly they left, but they were all in operation well in 1957 when we were kind of concentrating our little talk before. As I mentioned, other stations came and went before 1957. Warren's was originally on 50 Tanner Street, where those series of small shops are across the street from the library. He was there, I think according to his obituary, I believe he opened that in about 1938 and was there till about 1950, early 50s, when he moved up the street a few, literally just a couple blocks, bigger location there on Euclid Avenue. And as I mentioned, there were 3 on Kings Highway and Haddon Avenue. That's another angle of that, of course, is the old J. West building there on the corner there, and there was one across the street as well. We believe this is something I'm trying to figure out, but there apparently was another gas station just up from the Starbucks corner, I'm going to say. I think there were 2, and if anyone can verify that, we're still checking to make sure there really were 2 at that, right along that location. We saw those pumps on Tanner Street early. They were one of the very earliest gas stations. And there was a service station right next to where Carl's was in that block at 501 North Haddon Avenue, where that series of stores, low-lying stores is. But he was gone before Carl came, so we went from Earl to Carl. And we think there are others. Some people have talked about other locations that they believe there might have been. So we have more investigations to do, but. And by the way, I really love this on Warren's service station. This is an ad that was in the local newspaper in 1945, and they were still doing farm machinery. There's still enough, that was one of the things they fixed, and as well as washing machines. That jumped out at me. Obviously, this is a very quick overview, but this is where we hope we can draw other people's memories and memorabilia. We have a lot to learn. One of the things we know is that gas stations change brands a lot. They change names a lot. So we have a lot of little gaps for crazy people like us who love the minutia of all this studying to do. And so there's more to come. I really will all credit to David Hunter for one of our great idea and not only ideas but action people in the borough to come up with this idea. And it was, as Roger said, based on how much interest there was at the 65 Club, and I learned a lot of things from what people have said at that. So as I've often said with David Hunter, when he has an idea, you either have to run for the hills or be ready for full action. So I'm here for full action, and but I thank you for the initiative on all this. And I will turn it over to you.
Today, as you know, I publish Haddonfield today. So that's my context. So there are a couple of important things that I want to get across, but first I want a few thank yous. To Sherry Siegel to start with, the coordinator here at Mabel K. Yeah, give her a round of applause. Right? So for this particular program, a lot of behind the scenes work, including publicity on social media, and she's the one who provided the M&Ms, right? And you get it, M&Ms, memories and memorabilia, right? That's the connection, right? So if you come back next Tuesday and follow, there'll be M&Ms again, right? So there's another incentive. Roger Jacobs at the 65 Club for his work in putting this together and for publicizing this among the members of that club and elsewhere. We have two folks here this morning doing the video. They're from an organization I've just learned about called IDEA Institute of Technology. It's in Atlantic County. And one of the, and we wanted to record this for obvious reasons. This is not just about chatting. This is about doing this for posterity. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So we wanted to video the thing today. And when I learned about this organization, it was set up to provide opportunities in Atlantic County other than in casinos. So it's helping people to learn about technology and video and all those kinds of things. So Akash, and thank you so much for coming today. We really appreciate that. And of course to Doug, a great note of thanks. This clearly represents many, many hours of work, and it's a labor of love for him, and because it is hard labor. And so just one more time for Doug Rauschenberger. And of course, and thanks to all of you for your interest. I want to reiterate something that Roger said at the beginning when he mentioned that we'd been working on arranging an interview with Carl Nieukirk. And the most recent conversation between Doug and Carl on the telephone took place just a couple of weeks ago. And arrangements were being made for Doug to sit down with Carl and make recordings. That opportunity has gone forever. There are a lot of memories in this room. And so the idea of this Memories and Memorabilia project, with respect now to gas stations and auto dealerships, is to capture those memories while we still can. I don't want to wish anybody harm, but that's the reality. And that's why we'll be back here next Tuesday with a more round table kind of thing with Ken Tomlinson, and the focus being that particular gas station, Warren's, that his father owned. And Ken will have memorabilia. He's got a ton of stuff, and talking about that. So come along, 9 o'clock next Tuesday, and if you've got stuff, bring it, especially if you've got stuff about Warren's, right? The week after that is not yet set, but we'll be publicizing that as well. And so on, we'll go, as Roger said, until we run out of gas. And again, we'll be recording each of these sessions so that all of this stuff can end up one day down in the Historical Society. And on the subject of stuff ending up in the Historical Society, if you have memorabilia of any kind, but right now especially relating to gas stations and auto dealerships, please take action to make sure that your kids don't throw it out. So much stuff has gone in dumpsters over the years when the family has thought, oh, that's just trash. And the easiest thing is to just get rid of it. So at next week's session, Doug will bring a form from the Historical Society that you can fill out to say, I've got such and such, and I want this to go to the Historical Society either now or in the future. And then, you know, let your children know about that, your grandchildren know about that, so that they know what to do with those things that you've saved all these years, and that they don't become lost. There's a form that we put on every chair. Many of you have filled it out already, I guess. If you haven't, please do that and make sure that you leave that so that we can keep track. And I'm sure there are questions and comments for Doug, so I'll vacate the lectern here and let Doug come back and field whatever you want to talk about.
Thank you very much. My name is Gil Kosnet, lifelong resident of Haddonfield. Just a note and then a question. McAllen Buick, I remember particularly, I'll be 67 years old in a couple weeks. I remember as a kid, so this had to be in the early, maybe mid-60s, riding our bikes up to McAllen Buick to see the new Buicks, like for 64, 65, whatever. And I believe they moved to Cherry Hill on Church Road, across from Cherry Hill Mall.
Right.
My question is, and I couldn't help but think, with the, 14 gas stations in 1957, and the number of
15.
cars in Haddonfield had to be less than they are now. I wonder if there's any theory or knowledge of why there were so many. I have a thought on this. So many gas stations in Haddonfield in 1957, and today there's one. Not that we want more. But, let's have a vote
Right.
for more.
How about the corner of Grove Street and?
But my theory is back leading up through 1957, and I remember I was born in 56, I remember 1958, that's how far back I remember. You know, once you leave Haddonfield, particularly going through Delaware Township back then, Cherry Hill, it was somewhat rural. And I have a feeling that maybe that area, not greatly populated, but for miles out there weren't that many gas stations, so they had them in a central location. People from around the area would come into one of the most, the largest towns. But other than that, I don't know why. Any theories on that?
Well, I think you hit on the most important thing, is that it started to change with the coming of the Cherry Hill Mall and the great growth of Cherry Hill. But before that, and certainly in 57, Haddonfield was a central business district. It was the place that it was still fairly rural. It was, you hear about, in the Midwest, they talk about these farm towns where all the farmers come in. Wasn't quite that, but this was really where people came to shop. Yes, some would go into Philadelphia or whatever, but Haddonfield was a South Jersey sort of, so I think so they were driving here and would fill up their gas tanks. The other thing I think is that almost all of them, Strong's being an exception, I guess he didn't do mechanical work at all, right? I mean, it looks like but most of them also had, were doing servicing cars, and servicing cars was, people were going in every 2,500, 3,000 miles. I think there was a good bit of their business was also for that sort of thing. But I think business central is probably the key to the answer. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. And similarly, I remember when the Cherry Hill Mall opened in '61, October, I think it was. Yeah. The center of Haddonfield kind of dried up.
Yeah. Oh, it had a big impact.
5 and 10, general store, women's clothing, men's clothing. The mall, hey, we can go inside, it could be a blizzard, and we could just wear a sweater and do some shopping. Right. And Haddonfield had to reinvent itself, and it did very, well over the years. But I think, you're right, it was a hub for all the communities, for shopping, and shopping for gas, and auto repairs and so forth. There, we answered our own question. Thank you.
But it's an important point. Thank you for bringing that up.
Hi, my name is Rich Carney, and I will say that I was born in 1946, and I started coming to Haddonfield to stay at my grandmother's house at 109 Haddon Avenue. You know where the TD Bank is on Haddon Avenue? If you go across the street and go up 3 houses, 109 is where she lived. She was a real estate broker here in town, and I think she sold many of the houses in town. I have pictures of 109 Haddon Avenue, and there are no houses either to the left or to the right. It's just fields. So anyway, I came to Haddonfield. Haddonfield was always my second town, you might say. I live in Morristown. and I'm not a resident of Haddonfield, but I could only say that there were two stories. One, I worked in Stowe's Atlantic Station. If you're coming from Kings Highway from the west, or if you're coming up Chews Landing Road to the traffic light, or Warwick Road to the traffic light, all these roads fed right into downtown, and right there, the very first gas station you would see would be Stowe's Atlantic Station, and right next to us was the Exxon station, and then the high-speed line. I started working there, and what happened is my grandmother got dementia, and her house, she moved from 109, and as she got older, my grandfather was a lawyer. He graduated from the University of Pennsylvania in 1906. He was a lawyer who worked with people with the Ben Franklin Bridge. And anyway, when my grandfather was dead and my grandmother got older, she moved to 16 Lincoln Avenue down the street here. And when she got dementia, my parents said, listen, I want to switch. We're going to bring her and put her in your bedroom, and you can go live in that house in Haddonfield. Now, I'm 20 years old. I said to myself, that sounds like a good deal to me. Anyway, so then I decided that I would get a job as I was attending LaSalle University in Philadelphia. I should commute every single day from here up to LaSalle and back. And when I walked in, Mort Stowe only wanted to hire one person. And I said, well, I don't know anything about cars. I mean, I know what they look like. I can drive one. And then the other guy who showed up, his name was Jim Rafferty. And Jim Rafferty was the son of the service manager of Winters Ford down the street in Haddon Avenue. So anyway, he said, well, and Jimmy was going to St. Joe's University, and he finally wound up as a German teacher at Bishop Eustace High School out on Route 70. And anyway, so the two of us were the college boys, and we were both hired. He said, listen, I've talked to both of you, and he said, one of you know all about cars since you've been a little kid, Jimmy, and you know nothing. He says, this is not a bad thing because I can train you in my way. And so I said, well, that sounds good to me. So I started working there, and Jimmy and I worked together at night, the night shift, and he taught me all about cars. And then somewhere along the line, he said, well, why don't you move to Winters Ford and start working there part-time? I worked there in the summertime, went to school. Anyway, it's hard to talk. When I think of Winters Ford, the person that I think of is Ken McDonald. And Gil was, we just had a conversation about Gil knew Kevin, okay? So Ken McDonald was the person that was probably more influential in Winters Ford and what happened in the terms of the history than anybody else. What happened was he came, it's the story, and I'm telling stories, please don't quote me exactly, but the story that among us employees at the time was that Ken had Esterbrook Pen in Camden, and it was sold. And suddenly he had a big amount of money. What is he going to do with it? And he decided to get involved in Winters Ford here up the street. And not long after Ken came in with all that money, immediately they started talking about building down here in Cherry Hill. And so I remember they're saying, okay, we're going to move to Cherry Hill. And that's basically what we did. And I can remember the day. I can remember the moving trucks and all the things that went into it. And I will just share one more story and I'll sit down. And that is, so I worked over there part-time because we have to remember the Vietnam War was going on. And I was 22 years old. And all my friends were going over there. And so if you were a teacher, you were exempt. Especially if you were a teacher. I was a mathematics, computer science major. And so I decided to get a job. I taught at Cherry Hill High School East. And what happened is that I would work at Winters. I'd get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd go to Winners, and I became in charge of U-Haul truck repairs for Winners Ford, and I would set up all the mechanics for the day, and then I would go to Cherry Hill East because they were on a split session. I would go at 9:30 in the morning, and then I would teach all day, and then I would come back and I'd go around to the mechanics and say, "How'd you make out today? How'd you make out with the trucks today? Have any problems? I'll contact U-Haul and get a purchase order, whatever we need." And so I did that. I did that for 6 years. And what happened is that I'll share the one story because I love Ken. Ken and I got along great. And he called me in his office one day and he said, "Listen, Rich," he said, "there's a lot of people who work here." But he said, I don't pat myself on the back, but he said to me, "Rich, I need you to go up to Phoenixville, Pennsylvania and pick up a car." And he said, "You were the only person in this organization that I trust to do this." This is a Shelby Cobra. It goes 140 miles an hour. And I'd be coming down the Northeast Extension all by myself. Anyway, for some reason, I said, "Boy, am I that boring?" I mean, so Ken said, "Nope." He said, "You go up there and you get that car." And he said, "If there's one scratch," this was the most expensive car they'd ever sold. And he said, "If there's one scratch on that car, you're fired." I think he was kidding, but I'll never know. So I said, "Okay." So I got somebody, they drove me up there, they dropped me off, and then I drove the Cobra all the way from Phoenixville, Pennsylvania, down the Northeast Extension. I remember coming across the Ben Franklin Bridge, and it was a great story that I always remembered of how somebody who I just looked up to him like, I mean, he was the president of Winners Ford. I just, somebody trusted me, and I've always remembered that story. And Ken died in 1982. But Ken, if you're listening, thank you for putting that trust in
You
me.
didn't tell us how fast you were going.
I went to high school with Kevin when I graduated, and right about the time that they moved from Winter Ford from Haddonfield to Cherry Hill is when Kevin and Father Ken and family moved from, I think it was Elm Avenue to Lane of Acres. And I remember when they bought this real nice house in Lane of Acres, I think it was 55 Lane of Acres. Anyway, the house was $50,000. This was around 1968. I think they're up to 100,000 now. Taxes are 100,000.
Hi, my name's Pete Hurd. I've been a Haddonfield resident as Gil my whole life. A little bit older than Gil, 70 years old. And I want to go back to the two gas stations you mentioned at the bottom of Euclid, that flanked Euclid. One on Tanner, one on Haddon. One was the Warren Tomlinson shop, correct?
Yeah.
The other was an Atlantic.
Yes.
And that was owned by Augie Conti. For anybody that might remember that name. Augie he had 3 sons who all got in the business and ended up opening a repair shop on Brace Road, which is still there. And it was Augie Jr. who ran the front of the shop dealing with customers. Brother John ran what became a leasing and sales part of the business, and Frank ran the repair shop. So, and then they're still there. They all ended up moving on to a different line of work, and they sold the shop, but that's still there.
Yeah.
So, it's between Winter Ford and Crescent Road, about halfway on Brace Road there. So.
It won't be there much longer.
Really?
Yeah, they're talking about a Wawa.
Oh, that's just what we need, another Wawa.
But it won't happen for up to 5 years, so it's better.
Anyway.
I remember in the 70s when there was the gas shortage and you could only get a limited number of gallons. I don't remember how many, but it was very few. And at the time I was dealing at the Linden and Kings Highway station, and he would only take people who had been his steady customers, and you were still limited. And I remember one morning there was almost a riot. A woman was new in town and she was having a terrible time. Anyway, that was something no one had mentioned when what year do you remember? 74, 70?
No, it was a little later than that. Was it 74, 70, yeah, okay, so, yeah, all right. I was thinking it was just a little later.
Hi, my name's Lisa Hurd. I grew up in town, Lisa Kay. I was a classmate of Gil's and Kevin McDonald's and best friends with his younger sister. And I have two memories. One, my parents were loyal customers of Augie Conti's Atlantic station, so we spent a lot of time there. But my other memory is I had a neighborhood newspaper for a couple of years in middle school that had a circulation of like 60 neighbors, and I had some out-of-town people that I would mail the newspaper to. And I was the publisher, the reporter, the circulation manager. And we had expenses. We had a mimeograph machine in the attic that needed ink, that purple ink that smelled, right, and paper, and of course postage for mailing to the out-of-town customers. And Jay Chevrolet was one of my advertisers, which I always appreciated. Every issue he advertised. So that's my memory.
Well, just to finish up, make sure that you fill in both sides of this, if you will, and leave this. Who are we likely to see next week, next Tuesday? Some more people coming back. That'd be wonderful. 9 o'clock, same time, same place. Ken Tomlinson will be here, assuming he doesn't get a call to pick up a body, which is what happened this morning. Otherwise, Ken would have been here talking about what he has, and it's literally going to be a show and tell. He's bringing stuff to look at and talk about. So thanks again to Doug.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Sherry, thanks for your hospitality again. And let's keep this going. And remember, this is intended to be more than just a chat, right? We're doing this for posterity. So it's important to share your memories and for those memories to be recorded. See you next week. Thanks so much.
Thank you.